Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Dr. Luna Filipovic. Luna is a forensic linguist. She is a professor at UC Davis. She is a multilingual communications consultant. Her focuses include bilingualism, witness memory, and communication techniques in law enforcement. Her and her team study many different things, but one of the main focuses of their research is to enable investigators with evidence-based, science-backed techniques for obtaining relevant information more accurately and efficiently. And those techniques apply equally as well in the business world and at home as they do in the investigation world. So among the many great topics we're going to talk about today include, why do people decide to open up and tell the truth during investigative interviews or other stressful conversations? What is the impact of language on memory? We'll talk about the damaging power of complex and negative questions, and we'll get into the significant difference between committing to information seeking and confession seeking approaches, not just to investigative interviews, but any high impact conversation. All that and much more. Luna's fantastic. Can't wait to share with all of you. Thank you again for being here for another episode. Please, while you're here, take a quick second, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, leave us your feedback. We really do appreciate it. And of course, while you're on the internet today, take a quick second and check out our sponsors. Head over to humantell.com. That's where you can begin to develop the skill set necessary to recognize when people's emotions are shifting by pinpointing specific changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. I've done it all. I highly recommend their training myself. And while you're there, you can enter the code Linguist25 for 25% off the training of your choice. For the professional interviewers in the audience, please check out certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered on both joining the International Association of Interviewers and earning your certified forensic interviewer designation. Again, that's over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online, please go check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more to teach them how to uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. We appreciate you being here for another episode. Thank you so very much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Luna Filipovic. Hello, Luna. It is so great to see you again. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Michael.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So we met just a few weeks ago at the Elite Training Day for the International Association of Interviewers, and I was grateful that you gave us the opportunity to follow up on so many ideas. There's no way we can pack them all into one podcast conversation. And you're joining us all the way from Italy, which I really appreciate as you're teaching over there currently. So of all the angles that we were just talking about that we could take to start and run with the conversation, I think I would love to start with maybe the most important for anybody to understand. Whether you're a CEO, you're a parent, you're in sales, you're an investigator, it doesn't make a difference. Based on all of your research and all of your experience, why, in your expertise, do people choose to open up and talk?
Well, that is a fundamental question. And I'm sure we'll be back and forth with this very theme. Why would people talk? Well, first, if they are a suspect and if they are in a situation where they have to be there, they think, well, there are two main reasons, I would say. One reason is that they want to hear what's on the other side. They want to check out the other side, what the other side has. So why am I here? Sometimes, if you are a suspect who has done something, you want to see what evidence there is. You want to figure out your defense. You want to figure out how you would plead, depending on what's on the other side. Mm-hmm. So I think meeting your opponent and knowing what your opponent has against you. If you're an innocent person there, or if you are a witness or a victim of a crime, then you also want to tell your side of the story. Obviously, you want to make sure that your vision and your version of the events are there for the record, because you don't really know what kind of evidence is and what kind of story is being told. So you want to have your voice your voice heard. So I would say, depending what your role is in the process, there are many different kinds of motivations, but obviously it is to figure out what is going on and what it means for you. So that's why people start talking in the first place. And there is also the situation where you really don't want to be seen as non-cooperative, even though in the systems where we say you have the right to silence, we know psychologically silence is often equated to guilt, because if you're not guilty, why wouldn't you talk? So there is this attitude that, right, I really have to talk, even in the situation of suspect interrogations that I have studied extensively in California and in England as well. Even there, you have this attitude that I better talk, you know. So when they're asked the questions after Miranda or caution in the UK, as it is known, they're not identical warnings, but yes, we can touch upon that as well. Because in Britain, in the legal system, you can use silence as an indication that something is wrong, whereas in the US, you can't. But regardless of the legal provision, it's the human psychology to think, wait, well, if you're innocent, why don't you just tell us what you got and, you know, what have you got to fear? But unfortunately, as I know, having studied multiple cases, over 200 different cases in my database, you have a lot to fear. And one of the reasons is the interview, or rather interrogation method, that has been applied over so many years in across the globe. And that has been one of the reasons why people had a lot to fear, even if they're innocent. And that's why we have false confessions, we have got coerced confessions, we have got miscarriage of justice. So talking on the face of it should be the right way: communication, exchange of information, helping investigation. But there's so much that can go wrong in human communication, as you yourself know well from what you told me.
That might be the understatement of the day. So much can go wrong in interpersonal communication. I really love how you started with the illustration there. And selfishly, I like to say that often when people start to listen, we feel like, and this is especially true if somebody's in like a leadership role or a superior role. Often we feel like that we're the superior, they're listening to us and they're listening to understand what we're saying. No, that's not true. Especially in the beginning, they're listening to figure out what you just said. What's this about? Where is this going? And what does this have to do with me? Then once they believe they've solved that riddle, now they'll start listening differently. But once again, they're not listening to understand what we're saying. They're listening to try to figure out, okay, what information can I gather that helps me make the right decision for myself within my interpretation of the situation after I just solved that riddle. And for a lot of people, I don't think they realize that when they run into resistance, in a lot of ways, it's their responsibility. Like, had they approached the individual differently, they would have run into either far less or zero resistance. And this is true in business and it's true in investigations. So I'm curious to kind of piggyback on that idea and keep the topics flowing. If from your research, what impact have you seen on the language that people use and how that impacts what people remember or are willing to share?
It's tremendous. It is, you know, I talk to lots of people, both in the business sector and primarily in law enforcement, like police officers, lawyers, and judges, because my work has mainly been with law enforcement and on data from interrogations and interviews in that context. But you talk to them and you say, well, we all speak the language. What can you teach me about my language, about how to ask questions in English that I don't already know as a native speaker of that language? So that's the first barrier that you have to overcome. If you're coming from my background, which was the training in both linguistics and psychology, and you know, you kind of have to explain why your expertise matters and how can I, especially in case with judges, you know, who think like masters of legal language and of language in general and how language is used. And it's a lot of the law is about language. right? And how things are phrased. But the fact that we have got interpretation of the law tells you everything you need to know. So yes, it's all in language, but then why do we quibble about what things mean? If it were so straightforward what the law says, the word of the law, we wouldn't argue. There would be no arguments to be made in this context. So, of course, language is a living organism, changing, adaptable. In different contexts, things mean different things.
Yes.
Just one sentence could mean a lot of different things, depending on who said it, to whom, under what circumstances. It would be just a simple thing. If you say, "Shall we go out for a walk?" and I say it's raining, and you would assume that who goes when it's raining. We're not walking. You think we're not gonna go for a walk. But then, knowing that I love walking in the rain, you would say, "Oh yeah, that's great. Let's go." So the context knowledge would actually tell you that I'm accepting your invitation, and I may say it in an enthusiastic way. "It's raining, yeah, let's go." So you see, language, the same kind of thing, and the interpretation that we based on some default interpretations without any specific contextual clues, without knowing who's talking, who the participants are, the background of the participants, can lead us to really conclusions which are not adaptable to the situation we're in. So we have to keep an open mind and get a lot of contextual information, a lot of understanding about how language generally works, and about other things that impact how humans use language typically, how different cultures use language. Cultures, I mean, this is one of my main preoccupations are language and culture in communication and investigative interviewing, which has been really rarely tackled because we were only focusing on the monolingual situation, but most of the world population is bilingual. There is 1.1 billion people, I think, now who speak English as a second language compared to 375 million native speakers monolingual. So most of the world population is bilingual, bicultural, multicultural. So that needs to also feature in investigative context and to be taught and trained and understood well, because that can impact lives. It's real people we're talking about. It's impacting real outcomes, legal outcomes, but also families and individuals and organizations.
So much to unpack there. And I love your point about context, your analogy, like it's raining outside. My favorite one to use is, if I'm really angry at somebody and I'm charging them and I'm red at the face and I say, "I'm going to kill you." Or if my son says, "Dad, do you want to go play Tech Mobile on the Nintendo?" Yes, we still have that. And I look at him and I go, "Yeah, man, I'm going to kill you." Like that's entirely different things. But if somebody's just reading a transcript, how do you know which is which? So that the power of context is so important. I'm going to mention this, but then step away from it. I would love to spend hours picking your brain just on how language is supposed to work. But to step past that for a second and get back to bilingualism, for me, I'm very much not an expert in this. And unfortunately, I'm a bit of a stereotypical American. I speak one language, and I've had multiple adventures across Germany with a group of friends that were all multilingual. And I just sat ashamed with them and asked them to read menus for me and translate depending on where we were. But it's another regret that I have.
Never too late to start. Never too late to start.
That is true. We're working on my son. We're going to make sure that he's multilingual. But when I think of having conversations with bilingual people, like on the surface level, I think, okay, they are going to need to pause longer before responding because they're going to need to translate. I also think that their word choice might be a little bit different because they might not understand the exact meaning. So I need to give grace and understand the context and not be so nitpicky with my interpretation. But those are two ideas from somebody who can't speak two languages and doesn't have the scientific background that you have. So I would love to ask, because so many people are business investigations interacting with bilingual people. When we are speaking with people in their non-native language, what are the biggest considerations that we need to keep in mind?
Okay, the biggest consideration that, first of all, if the interview is taking place in a second language of a person, there is a real need to establish how proficient that person is. And there has been quite a lot of attempts. Oh, is it a proficiency test? that we have to administer to these people to see if they're capable to have this interview. Well, the proficiency test is not enough. I mean, it could help us. So it has happened in the past that suspects who needed to be tested to see whether interpreter is needed or not. I think generally people who don't speak English, who haven't lived enough time, we can talk about how much is enough and how this proficiency is assessed in detail. But if people have not lived in a country a very long time, like people who are recent migrants, let's say, and they speak sort of conversational, get by kind of English, they probably cannot understand any legal terminology, implications, anything. And sometimes investigators, because they have this initial chit chat, which is okay. Hey, how are you doing? Would you like a cup of tea? And the person say, oh, no, thank you. You're very kind, or something like that. They think that the language is much more advanced. The English is much more advanced in those speakers, but it does not. It probably isn't if the person, as I said, has not been operating in English and has not been fluent in English. So establishing conversation on different topics has to happen to see. It's not enough to have this introductory kind of rapport building sort of little bit and say, hey, you can probably do this in English, huh? Which happens a lot in the context that I've been looking at. Oh, yeah, we can go on in English. You understand enough. No, all of the cases that and mainly for me, it was the speakers of Spanish as the first language, because my data are from California, and Spanish is the main language in that bilingual combination there. Nobody that I looked at was able to follow the interrogation in English. So the interpreter had to be provided either halfway, or there was kind of half-baked answering, which was irritating the investigator. The investigator would then say, oh, is this person pretending to be, and I get these cases, say, is this person pretending not to understand English? And I analyze the whole conversation and the tapes and the transcripts, and I say, no, look at this question. It's so complex. There's like 10 questions in one. Even native speakers of English, if I test this in the lab, don't understand the question in English. And I've shown some questions like that at the event you attended recently in Chicago. It is just impossible to parse, to kind of process in a single language, let alone across languages, if somebody doesn't speak English as a first language. So I think establishing fluency across different topics, themes, contexts, pick a random topic with your interlocutor and say, hey, let's talk about, I don't know, the stock market. Or let's talk about climate change. So you got to really establish fluency. But even then, the legal sector is so sensitive. The legal terminology, the implications. I would say, as it's really safer to speak to people in their first language using an interpreter. So yeah, I mean, it's in the context of investigative interviewing, I always suggest that if the English is not a first language of a person, to employ interpreters. Of course, it's cost prohibitive, and I understand that not all organizations, even not all law enforcements, could have, and especially some rare languages. Like we had a situation like in England, we needed a Vietnamese. And people for women who were trafficked in the UK into the UK, and they did not want to talk to a Vietnamese national. So where do you find a white Caucasian Vietnamese interpreter? Because they were all fearing repercussion if they're connected to the gangs. When you see a Vietnamese person, you think, oh, what if he works with the gangs that brought me here? Infiltrated. So, all these difficulties, we understand, we appreciate, it's really hard. However, finding an interpreter or training bilinguals in your organization, that's one thing that is easily done. That's one thing that my team and I do. We train bilinguals how to be, you maximize your resources within the company, but using untrained bilinguals is really wrong, because untrained bilingual police officers have caused so many problems and serious crimes if they act as interpreters in a situation, well, helping investigation that's happening in English, and they're kind of interpreting without any training. It's really wrong. So I would suggest, yes, trained bilinguals are the key.
That training point is super important. Even when I had to use interpreters in investigations, we talked about the difference between translators and interpreters, which can be parsed. I know we're kind of playing with words, but I don't want somebody to interpret. Don't give me the gist of what they said. Like, it's got to be word for word. And if it doesn't translate, I know not every language translates word for word. You got to give me the best you can. And if an outside description is necessary, give me that. So if maybe the word they used in English, you would say, well, that means they're angry, but in their word language, it's a specific type of anger in a specific type of situation. Well, then give me that. Like, that's all going to be very important.
It's got to be meaning for meaning. It's got to be meaning for meaning. And the problem with that, I have to tell you, is that, as you said, languages do not map onto each other perfectly. There's no perfect overlap. There is a lot that, depending how close languages are typologically, but even languages we think are close, like English and Spanish. So let's say you have a witness saying, the man dropped the bag by the bushes. And you have to translate that into Spanish. You can't without knowing whether it was on purpose or not. English leaves this ambiguous. Like, she spilled her coffee on him. They pushed him off the curb. And the case that I had, this murder investigation, he dropped her on the stairs, that I also mentioned in my talk recently. So if you are to translate that into Spanish, you would have to use two different verbs or constructions based on whether it's on purpose or not. So there is a really big, massive difference between English and Spanish. So your interpreter, what interpreters do, they don't want to kind of seem incompetent, so they make the choice. But that's not right. You really need to know what the original speaker said, because in the murder case I looked at, the suspect was saying, it happened to me that she fell, which is accidental dropping. And it was translated into English. Oh yeah, I dropped her on the stairs. Okay, we have a confession. Let's go home. The police, finishes the conversation and they think they have a confession for murder. It can be that serious, and it comes from the lack of perfect match between languages. So we train interpreters and investigators together to understand these things, because the investigators can get really annoyed at interpreters. And we notice that in the British context, saying, oh my God, this interpreter is talking so long, and then it gives me just one line. I said, yeah, because that interpreter needs to paraphrase. There is no one word match, so the interpreter needs to use a whole sentence for that one word in English. Yeah. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. So knowing that takes away the tension between the two groups that need to work together, like language professionals and investigating professionals, and training them together is the best way. That's what we tend to suggest.
Yeah, in a perfect world, wouldn't that be great to have that opportunity more often? And earlier you mentioned, all of the problems that we could have with communication. One of them is misaligned expectations. So if we don't align our expectations with ourselves, our interpreter, and the people that we're speaking with, now, just drop a grenade. Who knows what could go wrong, because we didn't get those expectations clarified. And really, throughout all of the great ideas that you just shared, there's this core concept of focusing on what the other person needs. So if the truth is really paramount, if preserving a relationship in business is really paramount, if solving a problem is really paramount, then it doesn't matter if they're pretending not to be able to speak English or not. It makes no difference. What matters is getting the truth, solving the problem, establishing the relationship. And if they're going to be more comfortable doing that in their native language, then get me someone who speaks their native language. That's all that matters. And
absolutely.
In many law enforcement contexts, what are the odds that you're going to have to talk to this person or somebody who knows them again? They're above zero. So if we do a good job taking care of them now, that helps us. In business, what are the odds you're going to have to talk to this person again? Well, nearly 100%, depending on the context. So how we treat them now makes it easier down the road. So it's so important. You mentioned something in there that's one of my bias alert here, enormous pet peeves. And that is people who, and I've been guilty of this. So I'm in a glass house. I got a couple rocks. People who ask unnecessarily complex questions. So maybe the easiest example, at least here in the States, I don't know about in the UK, would be if a hiring manager says to somebody, please tell me about a time you had conflict with one of your supervisors. What was it about? Who started it? How did it make you feel? How did you handle it? What did you learn? They asked 7 questions. They can't remember all 7 that you asked. The person can't remember how to answer all 7. Their brain turns to soup. We don't get a valuable answer. Eventually, we just move on because we heard a couple keywords we think we like. Whereas if we just said, please walk me through the most difficult conflicts you've had to navigate with the supervisor, we probably get all of that information anyway.
Yes.
You've written about negative questions and complex questions and many more examples. And I promise you, I'm going to read all of those research papers.
Good.
But with the time that we have, could you please help us understand? Now, I'm going to ask a compound question, talk about using my own mistake in real time. But can you help walk us through some of the major mistakes people ask when they're asking questions and the impact that they have?
Okay, one of the main mistakes, and I did that. I did the analysis on both British and American data. So as I mentioned before, my data comes from both the UK and the US, California and England to be precise. And I looked at types of questions, and I was particularly looking at, because I was comparing the method that was and still is taught in some parts, well, most of the US, unfortunately, which is this sort of some of it is based on some techniques which have been, you talked about this, which have been dismissed with the science-based interviewing. But, the old way of insisting on confession, insisting on confirmation rather than elicitation of information. So this is the main, regardless of how you label the different approaches, one is kind of insisting on this confirmation based interaction, and the other is evidence elicitation. So the questions do vary depending on whether you're using methods which are confession directed or information directed. So that's a first kind of broad division of the types of questions. And one particular aspect that I looked at what the data told me. There's lots of different typologies of questions, and many people have written about it and studied them. But I let the data speak for me. I'm very much of an empirical scholar. I work on both corpus data that I collect through fieldwork, real life interrogations and recordings, both transcripts and recordings. And I also look at lab data that I elicit. So I test the complexity of the questions that I find in my fieldwork data. I then take it to the lab and I said, let's see how people deal with these questions, whether they can process it. Because, in the context of interrogation or an interview with the police, there is a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure. And so you think maybe they're not problematic in itself. Maybe it's the other things that are, kind of cognitive emotional overload. And then I tested to people who are not stressed. I tend not to have them so stressed in my lab. And they still can process the meaning, even without stress, in a relaxed way. They have no clue. So one of the biggest things is the complexity in questions. Part of it is due to the need for there to be a record. There's the silent participant. If you have an interview, you have the silent participant, which is the tape. So you're speaking for the tape. So in order to get the record on the tape, you kind of want to amass the information in order to make their record. Right. And then you have these questions, which we know are really complex because they have my pet hate are the questions with lots of relative clauses or if conditionals. Yes. And if this is the case, when this was the case, and also if that was the case, also when that was the case, and then, those are the absolute worst. So complexity is really problematic. You need to break it down in simple sentences. It may take more time, but it's really so much so much easier to process. Another thing is negative questions. They're inherently biased. And we know that they're actually a reflection of some kind of really negative state of mind. So if you say to your kid, why didn't you clean your room? You're assuming that they didn't and they should have. And it's a reprimand in itself. So that's not a genuinely kind of, I'm interested in knowing what's going on. So why didn't you do X implies you should have done X. I think that. So you're already creating conflict unnecessarily. I mean, there's always antagonism if you're interviewing a reluctant witness or a suspect. There's always this kind of antagonism. You are suspecting somebody of having done something, and whether they've done or not, there's always antagonism. So you don't want to aggravate that antagonism. You want to diffuse as much as possible, right? And so negative questions are really absolutely problematic and biased, and they create many more problems. So there's a really bad types of questions to be really avoided. So yeah, I think those are my kind of pet hates when I look at the data. There's lots of them in every context that I looked at in law enforcement.
You're speaking my language, and it's not just law enforcement. It's parenting, it's
Mhm.
coaching, it's in business. I see so many examples of it. Those if conditions are terrible. And I'm going to
Mhm.
over summarize a story that's not ours to share. But even at the conference you or I were at, there was a gentleman there who was sharing his story about falsely confessing to murder when he was a teenager that he
Yes.
didn't commit. And there's DNA evidence that said it was somebody else. It's this whole terrible, tragic story. But one of the ways that the interviewers were able to hang this on him was they asked him if questions. Well, if you did it, and if you thought, and if you did. And then, so now you're asking a hypothetical if question to a teenager. And when he answers them, now they're taking the answer to a hypothetical if question and presenting it as a confession.
Correct.
I mean, there's all kinds of
Yes.
problems with that one.
That's a horrific case, yes.
Awful. Even with the negative questions, we see it all the time. When the question feels like an accusation, conflict is there. And I love how you use the phrase reluctant witness, because often from an investigative standpoint, reluctant witnesses can be harder to talk to than suspects. And many times they can, not all, but many. In business, many of the conversations we have with people can fall into the reluctant witness category. Because there's consequences for what I tell you. Are you going to make me do something I don't want to do? Are you not going to let me do something I do want to do? Am I going to get trapped in this conversation longer with you? So that reluctant witness category translates very, very well to business conversations. And if you ask somebody, why didn't you? Like those types of questions, they feel like accusations right out of the gate. And you said earlier, confession versus information-based questions. Especially in the business world, going for a confession can equal a loss in the conversation. You're right, I didn't do it. Well, we just blew up the relationship. So congratulations on being right. You just got the confession you wanted, but now how are you going to fix the problem? Those information-seeking questions not only help with the reluctant witness and even the suspects, but especially in business and family conversations, it's a much more productive approach.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and speaking of confession, it's quite an interesting thing. I've studied confessions for a long time, and my specialty is actually a very horrible type of confessions, which is inadvertent confessions, where people don't even know that their words are taken for a confession. That's something we can I think we can have a separate program about that. Those type of confessions where there's such a miscommunication that I'm thinking that I haven't confessed, but you think that I had. And that happens more in cross-linguistic circumstances where there is an interpreter in the middle. I mean, there's people leave the conversation having completely different understanding of what happened. That is a particularly terrifying situation. But also in terms of confessions, people confess for very different reasons. And they confess, sometimes it's mental health issues, sometimes it's to protect a loved one. Sometimes it's that they honestly believe that they can't remember, then they've done it, but they can't remember. They can be persuaded to do that, and I've seen cases of that. But it is really, then it's really important, and this is something that's done very well in British context. Even if you get a confession, you don't stop asking for information.
Thank you.
So you go in and get those details. Even after the confession is given in the context, you want to safeguard against false confessions. So you do go and see, is somebody protecting somebody? Maybe it's a father protecting a son. Maybe it's a mother protecting a husband. A wife protecting a husband. So you really want to get justice done, and you owe it to your profession, whether it's a business investigator or whether it's a law enforcement investigator, to get justice done, and to get the right person who's responsible for the crime really be taken into account. So it's like getting a confession as a kind of holy grail in the past was really wrong. And I say to people I train and work with, if you do your information gathering right, confession is a cherry on top. It may come, may not come. If it comes, great. If it doesn't, you might have a great case without it. So if you do your job right with information gathering, confession is a reward that may happen or not, but at least you're safe. You're safer that way against the miscarriages of justice that are, as you mentioned, this horrible case of Jeffrey Descovich that we heard about at the event we were both at. Yes, we want to avoid that. We want to really, really safeguard against that.
Yeah, we want to safeguard against that, which unfortunately is at like the far end of the spectrum. But there's a large gap even coming back towards the middle of the spectrum that we want to make sure we avoid as well, not just such an egregious case. And that whole like confession versus truth conversation becomes so important. If I'm asking information-based questions and I'm gathering the truth, now I'm having a problem-solving conversation. And in the problem-solving conversation, I'm in a learning mentality. And now I'm gathering information and I'm cross-checking and I'm looking for different solutions and explanations. And for many investigations, like when I used to do investigations in the private sector, okay, great. I got the fraud confession. Awesome. And I got enough detail in it that now not only are we protected legally, but now they can go back and change their policies and standards and processes to make sure that another person can't do the same thing. The next fraudster is going to have to get more creative. We've solved the problem. So if we go into these conversations not as blame casting or not as confession seeking, but as problem solving conversations, now we can avoid that trap. And I won't waste time with this, I promise, but a silly quick story. Many years ago, I was conducting just a general theft investigation. There were two suspects. Honestly, I had video of one of them and circumstantial evidence on the second. I'm interviewing the first woman with a translator. Spanish is their language. They speak barely any English. She confesses to the theft. But then when I start asking for the details, she tells me it was for a homeless person. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. We're talking, how did you know? So I start asking follow-up questions, curiously, not accusatory. And it ends up coming that it was actually for her husband and for her father. And we get it all in detail. Bam. Talk about thank God for good decisions, which I haven't always made great decisions in my life, if we're being honest. But not only was I patient to get the details, but the translator I chose that day, was the assistant human resources manager. Fast forward 1 week, I get a call from the police saying that this woman is accusing me of getting a false confession and telling her that I was going to deport her and she'd never see her children again if she didn't confess. So when he said that, I laughed and he's like, this is serious. I said, I know. Here's the name of the witness who was also the translator. Go talk to her. And by the way, I've got the video and the written statement. So whenever you want to see it.
Why would she do that? There was a record. I mean, it's like
Here's exactly why. She had to go home and tell her husband not only that she doesn't have a job anymore, but the gifts that she gave him were stolen. So if I've got two choices, I can go home and confess those two things to my husband, or I can go home and cry and say, I'm out of a job. This is so bad. This is what they said to me. Now, I'm sure she didn't think through that he would do what most husbands would do and say, well, we're not standing for that. We're going to go get justice. And unfortunately, the further steps to justice then expose the truth. That's one silly little example, but imagine if I didn't. Imagine if I just took the homeless person's story and said, okay, imagine if I chose a different witness. Like those things that in the time don't seem like a big deal could end up being very important. And that's true if you're in HR. It's true if you're a CEO. It's true if you're a manager. It's true if you're in sales and you're traveling across borders or you're multilingual, multinational companies. All of these considerations are so important.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned this. We come back to the language and culture issues that I want to now contextualize this further. So if you have that's why knowing the context around the person you're talking to, knowing their personal information, getting as much personal, of course, having the record is absolutely essential. having the record, but also knowing those linguistic and cultural differences are really, really helpful to help you make the right decisions. You were talking about decision making in real time, which is really hard. It's easy in hindsight to say, oh, this was a good decision, but once you're in it, as you know, because you've done many investigations, and I haven't done investigations, but I analyze a lot of hours of investigations and transcripts and the record that you are talking about. So knowing things like, okay, what are the cultural, first language, yes, we talked about linguistic differences, and interpreters are there and joint training to know what could be the problem, work with your interpreters, prepare the interview and say, hey, this is the terminology that's going to feature. Is that problematic? Does this term exist in this language? What could be the problem? So it will be really good. The preparation is essential, as you know, in any interview, but especially in the cross-linguistic ones, but also knowing the background. So for example, there's a lot of cases of children who were assaulted from Arab backgrounds, and their background is such, and the shame and the taboo, that they don't want to bring shame on their family and their community. And that's why they're one of the most reluctant witnesses. So culturally, they're much more reluctant to volunteer information because of the community, the tightness of community and the shame of the community and the cultural values that are very different to our Western and, sort of Anglo-American world of values that we live in. And that is a very important thing to understand, especially we found in lots of cases of like sexual assault, that this features very prominently. Culture is extremely important to know there, but also in the kind of details you elicit. And, when officers sometimes get really annoyed and says, oh, I was asking for these details. I'm going in, I want the details, but the person is not giving me details. Is there something to hide? So I analyze and I say, well, people from certain types of culture, let's say Eastern culture, Asian culture, they're much more, and that's, both the social sciences and linguistics and psychology have studied these together. And I've got a recent paper. Oh, that's another for you to read. I'm going to send it to you. You can have a top of things in order. But this one I think is very important because it says investigators get really upset. So you're interviewing, let's say, a person from Southeast Asia, and whether it's in English or Chinese, this is a matter of culture, not rather than language. And they do not volunteer a lot of details. And they give you this holistic picture. They give you a lot of context information, but not the detail about the object or the people involved or the kind of, and that is very common because they have a different orientation. Those collectivistic cultures have different orientation in how they describe events and also how they remember events. Whereas if you're asking somebody from a Western culture, very individualistic, they focus on objects. They focus on how they feel, their place in the event, not the event as a whole. So you get completely different accounts of the same event based on who is your source of information and what their cultural background is. And this is something that we need to pay more attention to because it also creates this kind of misunderstanding and miscommunication, thinking, oh, this person doesn't want to volunteer information, they must be hiding something. No, you just need to approach this person in a different way because even if they speak English and good English, they may be coming from a different culture with different values and different patterns and habits in communication.
So many good points there. And if people didn't catch it, the difference between collectivism and individualism, it's not about language or even country necessarily. It's about culture there. And if we're aware of that, then we can change how we ask questions. So if I'm talking to somebody who's more from an individualistic culture, I can ask, like you said, questions from their perception, from their role. If we're speaking to somebody from more of a collectivist background, now we can ask questions from the situation back to them in order to try to get more of that information.
Absolutely.
I think there's an underlying theme now that's come up a few times too. One, you just nailed. We need to change how we're asking for the information. If somebody else has information and we need it, they're in control of the conversation, not us, because they're going to choose what information is okay to share and under what situation or circumstances it's okay to share it. So we are the ones responsible to change, not them. But there's also this frustration that grows inside. And there can be this sense of entitlement, especially if someone sees themselves being in a superior position, police officer, attorney, judge, investigator, boss, parent, superior, right? As that frustration and sense of entitlement grows, the quality of the questions tends to decrease.
Yes.
and our emotions and our stress levels increase. And now the likelihood of these misunderstandings and miscommunications, blame casting gets higher. So I don't know if there's a positive way to wrap this thought back in here as I get off on an unintentional tangent. But as we feel ourselves getting frustrated, it's important to recognize that we're the problem, that it's our interpretation of the event that's feeding the frustration, not their answer or perceived lack thereof.
And that is the normal feeling. I mean, this is absolutely normal, because if you have information and somebody's lying to your face, that's irritating in any context, whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's a professional relationship, it is really irritating. But the good news is, that handling this can be trained. And when I do a training, I show two parallel screens. One is a person, which I was really impressed. I went and found the best examples of police officers. When I'm analyzing the transcripts, I go like, oh my God, he's so guilty. Oh my God, I can't believe how patient this guy is. Why don't you? This is impossible. Look, he's driving around a bend. So I, just reading this conversation, cannot stand the patience of this officer. But this officer doesn't get a confession, but gets beautiful information and conviction. Whereas another officer who is kind of doing something that I think, yes, tell him that, he's guilty. He's so guilty. And then he loses the interlocutor. The interlocutor shuts down. No comment till the rest of the investigation. In fact, I show these screens to my students and I say, okay, what do you think happens next in the sort of lenient patient interview and the very accusatory interview? And, it's very easy to see that the accusatory interview doesn't end well. There's no scenario where it ends well. You don't get what you want. Whereas with the patients, and that can be trained. And even though, the police officer who was very successful interviewer, very extremely patient, to the point that, I'm reading hundreds of pages of this transcript. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, there's so much time spent here. But it was with a reason, because the police officer was extremely polite. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, and the suspect was saying, well, you could have phrased that question differently. Why didn't you ask immediately in that way? And the police officer was like, oh, I'm really sorry. Really, my bad. Let me go back and ask in another way. It worked like a charm. You got so many contradictions because the suspect was irritated by, being probed for information that he didn't want to reveal, but it was very much aggressive towards the officer. But of course, the officer's patience, as you said, that won the day, because they'll say, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, I know it's really tough for both of us here. Look, let me just rephrase this, because I got to do my job. So I got to ask you this question. So let me just rephrase this. So the beautiful thing that, you can really figure out based on real life cases that we work on, how you use language to achieve what you want, because it is ultimately about language, about phrasing things properly and getting your message across. Yes, but losing your interlocutor is probably the worst thing that can happen. So that needs to be avoided at all costs. As long as there is the channel going, you're good. You stand a chance.
Thank you. People look at me like I grew a fourth eyeball when I say I would much rather people lie to me than stay silent.
Yes. Yes.
If you're not talking to me, what do I do with that? I mean, there's some techniques to try to get you to open up, but what do I do with that? If you're talking to me and you're lying, you're engaged. And if you're engaged, you're giving me options. And if I have options, and this is a problem-solving conversation, not a coercive or accusatory conversation, now there's a path forward for us. And one of the favorite techniques I was taught was, if I've got somebody who I know they're lying to me, they've practiced it, they've rehearsed it, then give it to me, and give it to me in painstaking detail. I'm not going to contradict you. I'm not going to challenge it. I'm not going to call you a liar. I'm going to document every little word of your lie. And then I'm going to use that to try to circle back to the truth. But if I can't, now I'm going to take your well-documented, detailed lie and compare it to the objective facts I already have, which, as you know, in many scenarios, both in a legal and from an HR perspective, can be more valuable than an actual confession. If somebody's being aggressive, if they're being resistant, generally speaking, I prescribe to the belief that they are being who they feel like they need to be at that moment in time. They put on a mask and they're playing the role they think they need to. So if we can recognize that they're just wearing a mask, then it's not personal. And I can figure out the best approach to try to get that mask off, or at least solve the problem with them wearing the mask. I know you've written a lot about getting this information both accurately and efficiently. Correct. And I think a lot of people prioritize efficiently. I would love efficiency. My bias would be to prioritize accuracy because in the end, that's going to be the most important thing. But how do you help people learn to employ language techniques that balance both accuracy and efficiency?
Yes, well, that is the famous, carrot and the stick. Sometimes you have to be, it is this balance that that is the difficult thing that needs to be honed with training, really. So I think sometimes you have to kind of, I mean, the whole I think idea of efficiency is because the resources are limited, like police time, investigator time. It's all, payment in some way, time and time. I hate this, time is money, but time is money because we are paid for the time, that we spend on the situation. But I think balancing it is that the right kind of balance in terms of efficiency and accuracy is that understanding efficiency does not mean economy. And this is a very important concept to understand. So what is the difference? Economy means, if something is economical, it means it's like, it's the smallest possible amount, the cheapest thing. Efficiency doesn't mean that. Efficiency means using more time only when necessary, but not when it's not necessary. So just an example from language. If I say to you, hey, Michael, I saw the professor yesterday. It's very economical, very short sentence. Do you have an idea which professor I saw? No, right? That would be the most economical thing for me to say. And, we know all about language economy and how, we want to do with a little bit, we want to achieve a lot. But it would be much more efficient for me to say, hey, Michael, I saw the professor that also spoke at the same event as me. Then you now know there was a professor, namely a lovely person and a wonderful giant in the field, Chris Meisner, who spoke the same event as me. And so you know now what the reference is. So this reference was longer, but more efficient, if you see what I mean. So equating economy with efficiency is one big problem that people think like, okay, we can have this, we're going to be efficient if we are economical. That's not true. That's only, we have to understand that we have to be efficient means more time. We'll get that sooner ultimately. So it's like, in terms of decision making, I do appreciate, and that's why I said the carrot and the stick to when you're deciding the policy in your company. So you want to not invest, you want to tell, you want to not invest as much time in training, in outsourcing consultancy, people to come because. But you also want to, so you want to have the kind of the stick approach to the people who wronged you in some way, but you have to give them, there has to be a carrot, a nice approach, a nice method, something extra to your company that could ultimately, benefit you. It's not the preferred method, perhaps because it's investment, it's costly. But I think the same thing in interrogation, it's like, even if you give that kind of stick in the communication context, it's got to be with something with a carrot, like, look, I'm going to be nice to you. I'm going to be kind to you. I have to give you a bit of a stick. I have to ask you these questions, but you can sweeten it by being understanding and nice. And as a company, investing in that kind of training is also showing that, yes, it's going to be hard. We're going to be hard on crime, on fraud, but we're not going to be doing this the rough way. We're going to be doing this the right way, and we're going to invest in doing it the best way possible, which I think you understand involves learning through, events like this as well.
It's consistently getting more, not just more tools in our toolbox, but the really the effective tools in our toolbox, and understanding, as you mentioned at the start of the conversation, that we're dealing with other human beings, and the words we choose and the behavior we exhibit is going to go a long way in the information that they will share, the behavior changes that they will commit to. And if we stay outcome focused, what's the truth, what's the problem, what's the relationship, then we can use the right techniques, because now it's no longer about winning. It's not about superiority. It's not about dominance. It's about partnering with another human being to achieve an outcome. I could ask you questions for at least another 2 hours. And I know that you're being very generous with your time today, and I'm grateful for it. So what I would love to do real quick is ask you, because I've already been hunting your information online, but if I could ask you to please share with people where they can connect with you and where they can learn more. And then we're going to have to schedule a round 2 at some point for sure.
Super, thank you.
If you could let people know where they can connect with you and where they can learn from you and find your work, I would be grateful.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I am currently working, my work is academic and primarily, but I do work with professionals a lot. I am a person who really lets real life data into academia, and I based my teaching and my research and my publishing on real life cases, whether it's the kind of data I collect in different law enforcement units in both Britain and America, or whether it's my lab where I test. One thing we said we would talk about is memory. We need to have another one.
Get to that. So yeah, we do have to have another conversation.
Witness memory, and how you elicit best memories from witnesses who speak different languages. And
that's so important.
That is very important. So we got carried away there, but it was really lovely to talk to you. So I'm based at UC Davis, University of California, Davis. And please email me. It's my name and surname. It's lfilipovic@ucdavis.edu. Please, feel free to contact me anytime. I also, at the moment, I'm a visiting professor at the University of Modena in Italy. And I have to go back to California. I would have to say I would be a reluctant returner to California because Italy is so good.
I'm jealous.
I mean, it's not that it's bad in California. It's just I'm in the foodie paradise of Modena culture. I mean, Italy. What else? You just say Italy, and then it's just there, everything. So it's really beautiful. I'm teaching here until January. Then I'm back in the US. But I'm happy to connect with people via email, and I'm also happy to work with different professionals and help them achieve the best in the workplace, and really understand the impact of language and culture, maximize their time, because it's all about my work is about justice and equality, really, considering everybody the same, regardless where they come from, and treating them in that way, and also time and resource saving. It's what we're trying to do, to achieve the most with the least of expenditure. That's what we do, and I use only real life sort of cases to train. So it will be really good too, and I would like to learn as well. One thing we didn't mention that I want to mention is the work that we do, and I think it's both for me and you, is this risk minimization. Because if you don't do your research well, your preparation and your elicitation of evidence, then you can have the other side find holes in what you've done. So if I come and say, you interviewed this guy, let's say the other side hires me, and I say, you interviewed this person without him knowing good English. Here is the evidence. Your case, everything you elicited, falls through. So this is the thing to avoid. It's not just getting the evidence, it's preparing the evidence, making sure to get the best evidence without any holes, and presenting that evidence if it goes to court. So I think there's a lot of all the stages that need some kind of improvement from what I've seen. And as you said, not just in law enforcement. So I think it's a very rewarding path. I think doing this job, both research and training, and ultimately, making the world a better place.
Well, you're doing phenomenal work, and the
Thank
techniques and the
you.
examples and the cases that you're sharing are so impactful. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to join us. I'm absolutely going to be bothering you with emails and questions after I dive
Please
further into
do.
some of the
It's a
papers
pleasure, Michael.
I didn't have time to read, but I will read them. I will put links to your websites. I'll put links to you. I'll copy your email. All of it will be in the show notes so people can
Yes.
contact you directly. And because of all the things I forgot to talk about, it was memory. We will absolutely be scheduling another conversation. So thank you so much. Enjoy your time in Italy. Enjoy every minute while you're there. And maybe early next year, once you're back in the States, we can reconnect.
Would love that, Michael. Yes, keep in touch, and thank you very much.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Luna, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. We easily could have filled another hour or two. I really appreciate all that you shared with us today. Thank you. Even some of the core concepts like the power of context and, of course, the power of empathy and understanding the power of words. And when people speak different languages, just generally understanding how that can impact their word choice, their level of understanding, the pause and pace of conversations, all so very important. Really appreciate you sharing everything that you did today. Even ideas like separating efficiency from economy. Such a great point. So many people focus on being efficient, got to do it faster, but that's not the same as economy of effort or power or techniques. Thank you. And we talked a little bit too about, and we should have got more into this in more depth, but understanding collective and individualist cultures and even how that can impact how people see the world and share. Translation versus interpretation. So many great topics we covered today. I really appreciate all of it. Thank you. And of course, thank you to all of you who joined us for another conversation. We really do appreciate you being here week after week. Thank you so very much. Please, before you go, take a quick second, like the show, share the show, subscribe to it. We would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much. And while you're online today, check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com. Enter the code INCLUSIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice as you begin to develop the skill set necessary to understand when people's emotions are shifting by pinpointing specific changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. Done it myself. I highly recommend it over at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. Get all your questions answered about both joining the International Association of Interviewers and earning your certified forensic interviewer designation over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, please check out inclusive.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more as we equip them with the skills, perspectives, and techniques necessary to uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. We appreciate you being here week after week. Thank you so very much. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.